Stone Cold versus Vince McMahon. This is the rivalry that saved WWE, launched 1,000 beer trucks, and made it socially acceptable to stun your boss. Figuratively, of course, Stone Cold. Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon wasn't just good TV, it was seismic. Austin was the anti-hero every overworked employee wished they could be, while Vince leaned into being the world's most punchable billionaire. Every segment escalated, handcuffs, Zambonis, hospital bed beatdowns. It turned Raw into must-watch television and made WWE feel legitimately dangerous again. There was nothing subtle about it. Just a blue-collar rattlesnake and a billionaire in a suit trading middle fingers and chair shots. And it worked because it felt real. Vince didn't mind getting hit or humiliated, and Austin didn't mind doing the hitting. In an era of edgy chaos, this feud stood out as smart chaos. The Attitude Era wasn't just born here, it slammed a beer and flipped the bird. The Rock versus Stone Cold. This wasn't just a feud, it was a trilogy. And it was personal, theatrical, and somehow felt like watching two alpha wolves fight over who got to own the forest while wearing sunglasses at night. The Rock was charisma incarnate, cutting promos like Shakespeare with abs, while Austin was a brawling redneck demigod fueled by spite and domestic lager. They headlined WrestleMania 3 times, an unmatched record, and each match felt like a generational war. But what made it iconic wasn't just the spectacle, it was the contrast. The Rock was a corporate golden boy who talked a mile a minute. Austin grunted, cursed, and fought like a bar fight was a lifestyle. It was lightning versus thunder, and it just clicked. The crowd chose sides, then changed them depending on the city. No titles, stipulations, or convoluted backstories were needed. Just two top guys doing top guy things at the peak of wrestling's cultural relevance. Wrestling hasn't seen a rivalry this pure since. Probably never will. Undertaker versus Kane. Brothers collide. This one reads like a soap opera written by Satan, and it ruled. You've got long-lost brothers, arson, parental betrayal, and a lot of fire. Undertaker versus Kane wasn't just two big guys hitting each other. It was mythology in tights. Kane debuted by ripping a steel cage door off its hinges and tombstoning Taker on his own graveyard. From there, things escalated into a Shakespearean tragedy. If Shakespeare had a fog machine and Paul Bearer shrieking every 5 minutes, their WrestleMania clashes were brutal but dramatic, and Kane's sheer physicality made him a credible threat to the dead man's aura. Sure, the feud got rebooted roughly 47 times, including that storyline with fake funeral homes and exploding coffins, but the original fire burned brightest. These weren't just brothers, they were forces of nature, and for once, WWE leaned into its supernatural nonsense and created something that felt operatic, not cartoonish. Fireballs were thrown, souls were claimed, pyro budgets were destroyed. John Cena versus Edge, instant classic. Edge wasn't supposed to be the guy, but in this feud, he very much became the guy who made Cena better. Their chemistry was razor sharp. Cena, still being pushed as the squeaky clean Superman, needed a Lex Luthor who'd spear him through a flaming table while insulting his haircut. And Edge delivered. Their rivalry began when Edge cashed in the first ever Money in the Bank briefcase to steal the WWE Championship, and from there it was on. Edge brought out Cena's edge, pun intended, and Cena gave Edge his main event legitimacy. Their TLC matches were legendary. Their promos, even better. Edge played the opportunistic, leather-jacketed rock star who hated fans, and their fruity pebble shirts. Cena was the muscle-bound Boy Scout who refused to die. It was petty, it was violent, it was fantastic. Edge even threw Cena's custom belt into the Long Island Sound. And honestly, that was art. Triple H versus Shawn Michaels. Two best friends, one sledgehammer, infinite betrayals. This was WWE's most emotionally complex rivalry, and that's not even sarcasm. Triple H and Shawn Michaels were the backbone of DX, the guys who once mocked authority with glow sticks and fart jokes. Then Shawn retired, and when he came back, Triple H greeted him with a pedigree and a shattered back. Thus began one of the most personal feuds WWE ever produced. Their matches were vicious, starting with that unsanctioned street fight at SummerSlam 2002, where Michaels sold like he'd been hit by a truck full of guilt. Triple H brought the violence. HBK brought the pathos. It was Shakespeare in leather pants. And because they were real-life best friends, they trusted each other to go hard. The payoff wasn't just great matches, it was a story of betrayal, forgiveness, and one man's obsession with being better than his friend, even if he had to beat him with a sledgehammer to prove it. Classic. CM Punk versus John Cena. This wasn't just a feud, it was a cultural reset. CM Punk and John Cena were polar opposites in every way except one. They both wanted to be the guy. Punk was the indie rebel with a pipe bomb and a chip on his shoulder. Cena was the face of the company, beloved by kids and booed by adults. And together they told one of the most compelling stories WWE had ever risked telling. The centerpiece was Money in the Bank 2011, where Punk won the WWE Championship and left the company with it, literally. That moment alone became canon. The promo before it, historic. Cena, to his credit, played the perfect company loyalist trying to keep the wheels on the corporate train. Punk, meanwhile, rode off with the title in a storyline that should have changed everything forever. It didn't because WWE, but for one white hot summer, it felt like wrestling had its punk rock back. Cena was never more hated, Punk was never more loved, and the crowd was never more alive. Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair. Sometimes real-life tension makes for really great TV, and this one walked that line like it was strutting into a main event. Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair were best friends turned bitter rivals, and you could feel it. Every glance, every promo, every match, it all came with extra venom, and it worked. When Becky finally snapped at SummerSlam 2018, the crowd exploded. WWE tried to frame her as the heel, but fans instantly crowned her the man. Charlotte played her role perfectly, the corporate golden girl who got every opportunity handed to her. Becky was the ignored workhorse who elbowed her way to the spotlight and refused to let go. Their matches were stiff, their promos were sharp, and their chemistry was volatile in the best way. This feud helped launch Becky into superstardom and main event WrestleMania. Charlotte kept evolving, Becky kept swinging, and the fans reaped the benefits. It was the 4 horsewomen breakup WWE didn't plan for, but absolutely needed. Daniel Bryan versus the Authority. This is what happens when you try to bury someone and the crowd starts digging you a grave instead. Daniel Bryan's feud with the Authority was lightning in a bottle, and a bottle Vince tried really hard to throw in the trash, but the fans refused to let it go. Bryan was the everyman, undersized, underappreciated, and objectively better than half the roster. Triple H and Stephanie played the corporate overlords who claimed Bryan wasn't best for business. It was art imitating office politics, and it hit hard. The Yes movement went from a chant to a movement to a WrestleMania moment. Fans hijacked shows, social media, and basically forced WWE to give Bryan the main event slot at WrestleMania 30. And the payoff? Chef's kiss. Bryan beat Triple H, then Orton and Batista in one night, one arm raised in victory, the other in a sling. It was perfect. WWE accidentally told the best underdog story in company history while trying to push Batista in skinny jeans. Oops. Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels. This one was realer than real. Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels wasn't just a storyline, it was a shoot disguised as a feud wrapped in a work. And it ruled. You had 2 of the best wrestlers alive who absolutely hated each other, trading barbs on and off screen. Bret was the traditionalist, gritty, stoic, and convinced he was the last real wrestler. Shawn was the showstopper, flashy, cocky, and allegedly allergic to professionalism in the 90s. Their tension exploded at Survivor Series 1997 in the infamous Montreal Screwjob. A moment so controversial it spawned a documentary, a heel turn for Vince McMahon, and about 2 decades worth of fan conspiracy theories. But even before that, the feud had juice. Iron Man matches, backstage scuffles, sunny days comments. It was all unfiltered animosity. Their styles clashed, their egos clashed harder, and the audience got gold. The heat was real, and so was the legacy. Bret versus Shawn was lightning, just not the kind you can bottle without someone getting burned. The Bloodline versus Sami Zayn. This might be the most slow burn masterpiece WWE's told in the modern era. Sami Zayn, the ultimate outsider, wormed his way into Roman Reigns' family drama like an awkward sitcom character who suddenly got way too emotionally invested. The Bloodline, led by Tribal Chief Roman, had dominated WWE with stoic menace. Enter Sami, wearing an oversized Bloodline t-shirt and trying way too hard. It shouldn't have worked, but it did, brilliantly. Over time, what started as comedy turned into a Shakespearean drama. Jey Uso's distrust, Roman's manipulation, Sami's conflicted loyalty, and then the chair shot heard around the world at the Royal Rumble 2023. Sami broke the spell. The fans erupted. The crowd reaction wasn't just loud, it was angry, white hot, because we cared. WWE took a guy who wasn't even booked and made him the emotional center of the biggest storyline in years. The payoff may have been delayed, but the ride, flawless. Sami Zayn didn't just honor the Bloodline, he hijacked it. Sasha Banks versus Bayley. What started in NXT as a rivalry for the ages eventually graduated to the main roster and evolved like a moody teen going through several phases. Sasha Banks and Bayley were magic in the ring, first as bitter rivals, then as reluctant tag partners, and eventually as passive-aggressive besties with unresolved tension. Their initial masterpiece came at TakeOver Brooklyn, where Bayley defeated Sasha in a match so good it retroactively justified every bad decision WWE ever made about women's wrestling, almost. The feud kept reigniting in different eras. By 2020 they were the best thing happening on SmackDown. Sasha the Blueprint, Bayley the Karen champion. Their breakup was long teased, slow cooked, and when it finally happened it actually delivered. The matches had heat, the promos had spice, and the history gave it weight. In a company that often forgets what happened, 3 weeks ago, Sasha and Bayley got years of storytelling. Turns out, women's wrestling doesn't just belong. It runs the show when you let it. Roman Reigns versus Jey Uso. Let's be honest, nobody had Jey Uso main events pay-per-views on their 2020 bingo card. But then Roman Reigns came back draped in menace and perfect veneers and decided to destroy his own family to prove a point. The result? Instant classic. Roman versus Jey wasn't just a match. It was an emotional breakdown disguised as a wrestling feud. Jey wanted respect. Roman wanted obedience. And WWE gave them the space to tell a slow, brutal story about power, pride, and Samoan family values that may or may not involve emotionally scarring your cousins. The storytelling here was top tier. Jey refusing to quit until Jimmy threw in the towel, Roman crying while choking him out, and then Jey being gaslit into becoming his right-hand man. This rivalry launched the Bloodline saga, redefined Roman Reigns, and made everyone remember that Jey Uso was way more than just the other twin. Sometimes, all it takes to become main event material is emotional trauma and a well-timed Superman punch. Kurt Angle versus Brock Lesnar. This was amateur wrestling turned professional in the most literal suplex-heavy way possible. Kurt Angle, Olympic gold medalist with a personality split between intense and intensely goofy, squared off against Brock Lesnar, who looked like he ate weight benches for breakfast. What made this feud great wasn't just the matches, it was that these two respected each other while actively trying to murder one another in the ring. Their rivalry peaked at WrestleMania 19, where Brock Lesnar nearly decapitated himself with a botched shooting star press. That one move alone added mythos. But beyond that, their chemistry was undeniable. Angle could out-wrestle you. Brock could out-beast you. Put them together and you got matches that felt like legitimate competitions with an occasional death wish. This wasn't sports entertainment, it was sports endurance. Their mutual admiration added layers, and their matches felt like someone had secretly unlocked a fight night cheat code. Suplexes, submissions, and shocking displays of agility from two men who had no business flying. It worked, and it hurt. Randy Orton versus John Cena. WWE desperately wanted this to be the next Rock versus Austin. Instead, it was the wrestling version of Diet Soda. Technically fine, but not exactly exciting. Orton and Cena had all the tools: charisma, history, championships, abs. What they didn't have was freshness. WWE ran this feud into the ground, repackaged it, and ran it again. And it was like watching two action figures slam into each other on loop. Entertaining at first, but eventually background noise. That's not to say the matches were bad. Far from it. They had great chemistry, solid promos, and moments that felt important. But there were just so many of them. It became a meme. Cena versus Orton, the final chapter, until 3 months later when they did it again. By the time they wrapped it up, fans weren't cheering, they were sighing. WWE tried to tell us it was iconic. It was definitely long. Sometimes, a good rivalry overstays its welcome, and this one booked itself a full residency. The Fiend versus Seth Rollins. If you want to pinpoint the exact moment the crowd turned on a storyline like it was a cursed object, look no further than Hell in a Cell 2019. The Fiend, Bray Wyatt's horrifying rebrand, was white hot. Seth Rollins was the champion, and also trying really hard to be cool, which never ends well. The Hell in a Cell match was drenched in red lighting, gimmick weapons, and confusion. The finish? Rollins hit 30 curb stomps, used a toolbox, a ladder, and finally a sledgehammer, only for the referee to call a no contest. In a match designed to prevent exactly that, the crowd didn't boo, they rioted with their throats. It broke Seth's credibility, cooled The Fiend's momentum, and got WWE trending for all the wrong reasons. What should have been a modern monster classic turned into a meme, a mess, and a missed opportunity. Bray would recover kind of, Seth would turn heel again, but this feud never recovered. It didn't work. It haunts Hell in a Cell to this day. Triple H versus Booker T. This one didn't just flop, it nosedived into a crater of bad optics. In 2003, Booker T was red hot, a former WCW champion, fan favorite, and one of the few wrestlers with both charisma and credibility. Then Triple H, deep into his Reign of Terror era, cut a promo that sounded just a little too racially charged. Told Booker that people like you don't win world titles, mocked his WCW past, and then at WrestleMania 19 beat him clean. After one pedigree, with a long, disrespectful pause before the pin. That silence said more than any promo could. Fans were furious. The story practically begged for a redemption win, but WWE instead handed us a masterclass in tone-deaf booking. Triple H, already seen as a backstage power broker, cemented the perception that he buried people for sport. It wasn't just a match. It became a case study in how to undermine a great talent, alienate your audience, and somehow turn wrestling into a sociology lesson no one wanted. Goldberg versus The Fiend. In one corner, you had The Fiend, a supernatural horror-themed character with months of build, eerie promos, and a genuinely fresh vibe. In the other corner, a 50-something part-timer known for yelling, sweating, and ending matches in under 2 minutes. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, right, everything. At Super Showdown 2020, WWE had Goldberg squash The Fiend in under 3 minutes. The logic? Apparently fear and mystique are no match for a few shoulder blocks and a confused-looking jackhammer. The decision was baffling. The Fiend had been built as invincible. Goldberg hadn't been invincible since Bush was in office. Fans revolted. It derailed The Fiend, discredited the concept of long-term storytelling, and reinforced that WWE's nostalgia addiction wasn't just a phase, it was a business model. Bray Wyatt would never recover his mystique. Goldberg, meanwhile, was just happy not to concuss himself this time. When you book an unstoppable monster to lose to a sprinting nostalgia act, don't act shocked when the fans don't forget. Roman Reigns versus Braun Strowman. On paper, this rivalry should have worked. Roman Reigns, the chosen one, versus Braun Strowman, the human mountain who once flipped an ambulance. Their early matches were surprisingly fun. I'm not finished with you became a meme. Braun wrecking Roman backstage felt cathartic, and for a brief moment it looked like WWE might elevate a new monster to main event status. But then, creative got involved. The feud went from organic chaos to overproduced clutter. Strowman, who had real momentum, kept losing in anticlimactic ways. Roman won most of the time, but somehow came out less cool with each win. The booking flipped week to week, and eventually fans stopped caring. It wasn't that the rivalry was bad, it just never evolved. They ran the same segments, same matches, same ambulance spots until the feud went from can't miss to didn't we see this 2 weeks ago. Braun would eventually get the title, but not when it mattered. And Roman. He didn't become cool until he stopped talking and started gaslighting his cousins. Jay Styles versus Shinsuke Nakamura. Their Wrestle Kingdom match was legendary. Their WWE feud, not so much. When AJ Styles and Shinsuke Nakamura met at WrestleMania 34, it was hyped as a dream match. The kind of bout that wrestling nerds wear custom t-shirts for. But instead of hard-hitting, strong-style magic, we got a match. It was fine. And then Shinsuke turned heel. And then somehow they wrestled like a dozen more times. And all anyone remembers is that he kept hitting AJ in the balls. That's it. Their entire post-Mania feud boiled down to low blows and frustrated hopes. WWE tried to inject drama by staging one who can stand up first match after another. But the fans had already checked out. You had two world-class performers, a global fan base waiting for greatness. And WWE gave us testicular trauma. It didn't ruin their careers, but it did prove that even dream matches can become cautionary tales if the storytelling has all the depth of a parking lot puddle. Dean Ambrose versus Seth Rollins. This heel turn had nuclear heat, and then WWE doused it with cold, confusing nonsense. When Dean Ambrose turned on Seth Rollins in 2018, on the same night Roman Reigns announced his leukemia diagnosis, the betrayal hit like a gut punch. It was raw, shocking, and beautifully timed. It should have launched a months-long blood feud. Instead, it launched a months-long gas mask tour. Dean started cutting cryptic promos about City smelling bad, got vaccinated on live TV, and wrestled in outfits that screamed discount Bane. Meanwhile, Seth kept trying to sell it like a personal war, even though the material felt like something from a cancelled CW pilot. Fans wanted revenge, but got discomfort. Their match at TLC 2018 was so poorly received that the crowd chanted, "This is boring." And this was prime Shield era talent. It was a rare case where WWE took something molten hot and froze it with bad writing and worse fashion. When your top feud becomes performance art for weirdos, you missed the mark. Undertaker versus Goldberg. You ever watch two legends fight and suddenly wish you hadn't? That was Super Showdown 2019. On paper, Goldberg versus The Undertaker sounded like a marquee fantasy match if the year was 1999. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It was 2019 and both men were physically spent trying to relive the glory while gravity begged them to stop. Goldberg knocked himself out early. Taker nearly broke his neck attempting a tombstone, and the match ended with a jackhammer that looked more like a tired hug into the floor. WWE promoted this as a dream clash. What fans got was a cautionary tale about not mixing high-impact offense with AARP eligibility. Worse, it didn't just damage two icons' legacies, it undercut the entire appeal of bringing back legends. The commentary team tried to sell it as gritty, but everyone else just saw a disaster. Moral of the story? Some rivalries need to stay hypothetical, especially when both men leave the match needing a chiropractor and maybe a therapist. Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar. If this rivalry had a relationship status, it would be, it's complicated. Roman and Brock have wrestled so many times. We're basically on season 6 of their ongoing saga. The early chapters were met with loud boos, awkward pacing, and a general sense that no one really wanted to see it, except Vince. Roman wasn't over yet, and Brock was showing up once a month like a part-time school principal. Their WrestleMania 34 match ended with fans chanting, "This is awful." But here's the twist. Once Roman turned heel and became the tribal chief, everything changed. the dynamic flipped. Suddenly, this Roman had the aura, and that Brock, cowboy hat and all, was actually likable. By the time WrestleMania 38 rolled around, the storyline finally clicked. Even if the match still felt a bit sluggish, this rivalry didn't work. Until it did. It's proof that long-term booking isn't always about planning. Sometimes it's just doing the same match until the audience gives up and cheers anyway. Bray Wyatt versus Randy Orton. Few rivalries have burned as hot and then fizzled quite as weirdly as Bray Wyatt versus Randy Orton. It started strong. In 2016, Orton joined the Wyatt family and fans were hooked. Then he burned down Bray's compound. Normal workplace drama. The stage was set for WrestleMania 33, fire, mind games, cult symbolism. It should have been a horror epic. Instead, they projected CGI maggots onto the ring. That's not a metaphor. Actual bugs. On a screen, fans were baffled and Bray lost. Then came round 2, The Fiend vs Randy Orton. Surely WWE learned from the first time. Right, wrong. It ended with Orton defeating a magically resurrected Fiend, who emerged from a jack-in-the-box and got distracted by Alexa Bliss, bleeding black goo. The feud was like a Halloween ride that forgot to stop. Moments of brilliance buried in layers of creative fog. They had chemistry, history, and fan investment, but every climax arrived with a wet thud. Horror is hard. Horror in wrestling, apparently harder. Charlotte Flair versus Ronda Rousey. On paper, Charlotte versus Ronda Rousey should have been a generational dream feud. 2 elite athletes, high-profile names, legacy versus legitimacy. Instead, we got a rivalry so awkward it made contract signings feel like hostage negotiations. Their first match at Survivor Series 2018 was surprisingly good, until Charlotte snapped and went full heel with a kendo stick rampage. That part worked. The follow-up, not so much. Every promo between them felt like a battle to see who could sound less natural. Ronda's intensity never translated on the mic, and Charlotte's robotic delivery made even insults feel pre-scripted. They tried again at WrestleMania 38, with Ronda as the babyface and Charlotte as the heel, but the crowd never really bought into either of them. The match was fine, but it had the emotional punch of a C-SPAN hearing. These two should have torn the house down. Instead, they tore through scripts that never made them feel human. Ronda left soon after, Charlotte kept spinning the wheel, the fans moved on. Kofi Kingston versus Randy Orton. This was supposed to be revenge a decade in the making. In 2009, Randy Orton allegedly buried Kofi Kingston's push with the now infamous Stupid incident. Fast forward to 2019 and Kofi was finally WWE champion after a genuinely heartwarming rise. The stars aligned for a personal red-hot feud. And then WWE forgot to make it good. The matches were forgettable. The promos leaned too heavily on reality without ever fully embracing it. The feud ended at Clash of Champions with a double countout. You read that right. The climax was both men rolling around outside the ring like two guys fighting over the last slice of catering. Kofi retained, but the energy evaporated. Instead of delivering closure, WWE shrugged its way through what could have been a career-defining moment. And to make things worse, a few weeks later, Kofi lost the title in 9 seconds to Brock Lesnar. No rematch, no revenge, just an F5 and silence. WWE had lightning in a bottle, then they opened the bottle and spilled it on purpose. Sheamus versus Daniel Bryan. This wasn't a rivalry, it was a mugging disguised as a WrestleMania match. WrestleMania 28 opened with Sheamus versus Daniel Bryan for the World Heavyweight Championship. Fans were excited, Bryan was over, the crowd was hot, and then it was over. Literally 18 seconds later, Bryan kissed AJ Lee, turned around and got Brogue kicked into oblivion. That was the whole thing. WWE expected cheers. Instead, they ignited an organic fan rebellion that would snowball into the Yes Movement. The feud never got a real reboot because WWE didn't see Bryan as the guy yet. So Sheamus got his moment, Bryan got buried, and the fans got furious. The only good thing to come from this squash was the backlash. It exposed how disconnected WWE sometimes was from its audience, and how fans were ready to riot if their underdog got punked. The feud never got justice, but the aftermath did. Sometimes failure lights a fire, and this one lit a WrestleMania main event 2 years later. Bobby Lashley versus Theory. WWE tried to build Theory as the future, and Bobby Lashley was assigned to be the big, imposing obstacle in his way. The result? A rivalry that never caught fire because it felt more like a training exercise than a blood feud. Lashley's a powerhouse and Theory's a cocky upstart, so the dynamic should have clicked. But WWE spent more time telling us Theory would be great than letting him be great. Lashley won their matches clean, Theory kept bouncing back like nothing happened. It was the rivalry equivalent of throwing water on a sponge. Pointless and soggy. Worse, it came during a time when Vince McMahon was heavily pushing Theory, which added an awkward chosen one aura that turned fans off. Instead of elevating either man, this feud felt like filler. Lashley remained over despite it. Theory eventually found his footing, but not because of this. Sometimes the worst rivalries aren't loud failures. They're the quiet ones that make you say, wait, didn't they feud? AJ Styles versus Omos. A tag team breakup feud is a classic wrestling trope. Friendship turned to betrayal, betrayal turned into violence, violence turned into money. That did not happen here. AJ Styles and Omos were an odd couple tag team that somehow worked, until WWE split them up with zero build-up. Omos turned heel, squashed AJ, and then floundered on his own. AJ tried to sell the emotion, but there was nothing to work with. No betrayal angle, no reason beyond creative said so. Omos looked dominant, but the story had no meat, just protein powder. AJ did what he could, but this wasn't HBK versus Jannetty. It was more like a sad breakup, where one person leaves and the other just kind of shrugs. WWE clearly hoped this would launch Omos into singles superstardom. Instead, it launched him into sporadic appearances and vague intimidation. AJ rebounded, of course, he always does. But this feud, it was like a movie trailer with no actual movie, just vibes, mostly awkward ones. Drew McIntyre versus Karrion Kross. Drew McIntyre, the sword-wielding Scottish warrior who carried the company through the Thunderdome era, deserved a big rivalry upon returning to the live crowd. Instead, he got Karrion Kross. Now, Kross is a solid talent with a cool aesthetic and an even cooler entrance, but the chemistry between him and Drew was not great. Their feud had all the makings of a main event story, violence, intensity, hair product, but none of it connected. Part of the problem, Kross had been damaged goods since his Raw debut in that infamous gladiator helmet. The audience hadn't bought back in yet, and Drew was stuck trying to sell him like a final boss. The strap match at Extreme Rules was fine, but forgettable. This rivalry didn't elevate either man. Drew felt stuck in place. Kross remained a cool entrance in search of momentum. WWE wanted a fire. What they got was sparks in the wind. It wasn't bad, just thoroughly meh, and in wrestling that's sometimes worse. Shane McMahon versus the world. Shane McMahon is proof that jumping off high places doesn't automatically make you beloved. Somewhere along the line, WWE decided Shane wasn't just the scrappy son of the boss. He was a legit main event threat, and then they gave him feuds with Roman Reigns, The Miz, Kevin Owens, Braun Strowman, and anyone else not booked that month. At first, it was novel. The boss's son getting wrecked in big spots. Then it got weird. Shane beating top stars while insisting he was the best in the world. The turning point came at WrestleMania 35, when Shane defeated The Miz in a match where Miz's dad entered the ring and squared up like your uncle at a barbecue. The feud made zero sense, yet it kept going. Eventually, fans turned on it completely. By the time Shane returned in 2022, fans booed out of reflex. He tore his quad 30 seconds into the match, and somehow even that felt symbolic. Sometimes being the boss's son isn't a character, it's the problem. If you enjoyed this, hit the subscribe button because there's more coming your way.